Section 30 of Journal of the Reverend Francis Asbury, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Brian Keenan. Friday 4. We crossed Edisto River and came to Island Creek. At a pole house I talked a while on 1 Chronicles 7:14 and administered the sacrament. My feet were as if they had been steeped in water. We had to ride 3 miles for lodgings, hungry, wet, and weary. Since 8:30 yesterday, we have ridden upwards of 60 miles. I am now turned 50 years of age, and feel it hard to flesh and blood to go upon the old line, as in former days. God is at work in this place, so that we do not labor and suffer altogether in vain. I was under some difficulties about getting along, owing to the great rains, which have so raised the watercourses that they are impassable. We at length directed our course towards Augusta. With deep wading, by the assistance of Brother B, and by the blessing of Providence, we came to Father E.'s, a lot in Sodom. It is all right that I should come to see these aged people, and preach to the young ones. I'm weary, but I will travel on. I only want more of the spirit of faith and prayer. I feel very sensibly for my dear Charleston people. I doubt not but they think of and pity me. My feet have been wet every day, for 4 days successively, but the kindness of the people helpeth me greatly over these troubles. Wednesday 9. Rode 25 miles to Chester's. Here I learned Edisto was impassable. If we had not hasted along as we did, we should not have passed it in proper time, and I should have been prevented from visiting Georgia this year also. There are so many watercourses, and so few ferries, that going through this country in any certain time is like a lottery. Thursday 10. We sent notice through the neighborhood to collect a congregation, so I had the privilege of preaching to a people I had not addressed for 6 years. O my soul, how dost thou travail for souls night and day? Georgia. I crossed W's Ferry. The point on the south side is washed like a beach, and the house swept away by the late freshets. I saw how the flood had plowed up the street of Augusta. I walked over the ruins for nearly 2 miles, viewing the deep gulfs in the main street. I suppose they would crucify me if I were to tell them it is the African flood, but if they could hear me think, they would discover this to be my sentiment. I was honored with the church to preach in, where I had about 400 respectable hearers. I have delivered my own soul, it may be once for all. I have ridden about 190 miles from Charleston into Georgia. I have attended 4 meetings, and have not had in all above 600 hearers. Wednesday 16. I rode 15 miles to White Oak. I was sick. The house was very open, and the wind blew powerfully. Dying, dead, unpleasing appearances. We swam our horses across Little River, and had to ride 15 miles after preaching to get our dinners. Friday 18. I was very much outdone before I reached Combs Meeting House, which was very open. I was very warm in preaching. I rode to G's in the evening, making it nearly 20 miles. When I came there, I was so indisposed that I was glad to go to bed. Next morning I felt better, and rode to the school at Coke's Chapel, where, after preaching, I partially examined the scholars. Thursday 24. I had a few wealthy and I fear wicked people at Pope's Chapel. I preached on our Lord's weeping over Jerusalem. We had deep wading across Long Creek, and made it nearly 20 miles to . Very kind, but no religion here. Since I have been in Georgia, I have had a blessed time of consolation in my own soul. I must needs go through Petersburg. I had to ride to Curltail River, and thence to the head of Reedy River, 28 or 30 miles. We got no food for man nor horse until we came to D's. I preached to his father, 22 years ago. South Carolina, Tuesday, 29. I held forth about an hour and a half on Acts 3:26. We set out again about 2 o'clock, and had to ride for our dinner only 20 miles. We crossed Muddy and Lick creeks, Little and Great Bush rivers. These afforded bodies of excellent land. Wednesday, 30. We had a meeting of the trustees of Bethel School, and it was agreed it should be a free school, and that only the English tongue and the sciences should be taught. I drew up an address on behalf of the school in order to raise $300 per annum, to support a president teacher. I dined with my unshaken friend W.P., an Israelite indeed. He hath all things richly to enjoy, and a good conscience also. He was formerly a traveling preacher amongst us, and labored for and with us nearly as long as he was able. The weather is as warm here as in the month of June to the north. I was so weary with the riding I could not sleep. Sunday, April 3. A multitude of sinners came together at W.S.'s. I feel myself still faint and feeble, and would not live always. Monday, 4. I crossed Fair Forest and came to J.G.'s, where I had to stop and rest. Since I came into South Carolina, I have ridden through Newberry, Spartansburg, Union, and Lawrence counties. There is a general complaint of the want of corn in these parts, and no wonder, when we consider the great storm which they have had, and the number of stills in the country. The people here drink their bread as well as eat it. I am so very poorly in body that close study injures me. I crossed Lawson Fork at the high shoals a little below the beauty spot. I could not but admire the curiosity of the people. My wig was as great a subject of speculation as some wonderful animal from Africa or India would have been. I had about 100 people at the meeting house. Some came to look at, and others to hear me. We must needs go off without any dinner, intending to ride nearly 40 miles to Father Moore's, in Rutherford County, North Carolina. After Brother M. and myself had preached, we passed the cow pens, where Morgan and Tarleton had their fray. We made it nearly 25 miles to the Upper Island Ford, on the main Broad River, and after traveling until 7 o'clock at night, were glad to stop at Brother S.'s, 10 miles short of the place we intended to reach when we set out. North Carolina, Wednesday, 6. We came to Moore's. I was at a loss how to address myself to these people. It may be for the last time. It was laid on my heart to speak from our Lord's lamentation over Jerusalem. I felt awful among them. Saturday, 9. We came to Cane Creek in Burke County. We dined on some peach pie in the woods. In the afternoon there arose a most dreadful storm of rain, with thunder and lightning. It was very awful. We cried to God for man and beast, and were preserved. We came in about 7 o'clock, and were received by T.B. with great kindness. Monday, 11. We crossed Lovelady's Ferry and came to Connell's, where I met with several preachers. After preaching, I was going to administer the sacrament, and discovered that what they had provided for wine was in reality brandy, so I desisted. Here I met Dr. B.L.L., who is still praying and waiting for the consolation of Israel. I rode a mountainous path 6 miles to Father W.'s, where we dined. Ah, what a round of continual running is my life! Of late, feeble as I am, I cannot help thinking of Cumberland, in Tennessee, and trying to go there. If I must go to Kentucky, I think it is time to go to Cumberland also. Thursday, 14. We took our departure from Johns River, up the branches of Catawba. On our way we met with a half-dozen living creatures, like men and women, who seemed quite pleased with their mountain wedding. They were under the whip, riding 2 and 2 as if they would break their necks, One had a white cloth, like a flag, and the other a silk handkerchief. When they had spent their fire, they called at a still house to prime again. I ascended about 1 mile up a mountain, and came to M. Davenport's. Here I feel deep dejection of mind, as well as great weakness of body, and as if I could lie down and die, owing in some measure, I presume, to the great fatigue I underwent in ascending the mountain, which was very steep. Saturday, 16. We set off at 6 o'clock, and directed our course up Tow River, thence up the rocky creek through the gap of the Yellow Mountain, to the head waters of Tow River. We had to ride till 8 o'clock at night. My mind is still under deep depression. Tennessee, Sunday, 17. I preached at Dawes to about 200 people, and then met the society and had a melting season. The milk and water of this country are both as physic to me. I'm afraid that such shocks as these will, some time or other, overset me. Monday, 18. I rested at D's, my body very feeble, and mind under exceeding dejection, with imaginary and real evils. Tuesday evening, the preachers came in from Kentucky and Cumberland. Wednesday, 20. Our conference began in great peace, and thus it ended. We had only one preacher for each circuit in Kentucky, and one for Green Circuit in Tennessee. Myself being weak, and my horse still weaker, I judged it impracticable to attempt going through the wilderness to Kentucky, and have concluded to visit Nolichucky. I wrote an apology to the brethren in Kentucky for my not coming, and informed them of the cause. Monday, 25. On the banks of Nolichucky, I parted with our dear suffering brethren, going through the howling wilderness. I feel happy in God. Sinners appear to be hardened, and professors cold. The preachers, although young men, appear to be solemn and devoted to God, and doubtless are men who may be depended upon. North Carolina. I came to C's, where I saw a Baptist minister, who had moved from Georgia to Kentucky. He appeared desirous of returning again. I was told he expressed his fears that the ministers in Kentucky will be a curse to each other, and the people too. Good religion and such good land are not so easily matched together. We came to D's and had a full meeting. Brother Hill and his aides had a great time on the Sabbath, and I trust the time to favor this people is come. Sunday, May 1. We came to Acuff's chapel. I found the family sorrowful and weeping on account of the death of Francis Acuff, who from a fiddler became a Christian, from a Christian a preacher, and from a preacher, I trust, a glorified saint. He died in the work of the Lord in Kentucky. I found myself assisted in preaching on Ephesians 2, 1-2. The house was crowded, and I trust they did not come together in vain. I was somewhat alarmed at the sudden death of Reuben Ellis, who hath been in the ministry upwards of 20 years, a faithful man of God, of slow but very solid parts. He was an excellent counselor, and steady yoke-fellow in Jesus. My mind is variously exercised as to future events, whether it is my duty to continue to bear the burden I now bear, or whether I had not better retire to some other land. I am not without fears that a door will be opened to honor, ease, or interest, and then farewell to religion in the American Methodist connection. But death may soon end all these thoughts, and quiet all these fears. Virginia, Thursday, 5. I came to Blank's, thence to the unmeaning meeting house, and found a wild, wicked people, to whom I preached on Genesis 19:18. An appointment had been made for me to preach in Abingdon. As I expected there would be no opportunity, as the court was then sitting, I concluded to go off to Clinch, but was informed there would be, by the will of the judges, an adjournment of the court for my preaching. I therefore went and preached at 3 o'clock, and had the judges, some of the lawyers, and very few of the citizens to hear me. As sentence was passed on a poor criminal this day, and 2 more were burnt in the hand, I judged I ought to meet the solemnities of the day, and spoke on, knowing therefore the terrors of the Lord we persuade men, but was shut up in my own mind. Saturday, 7. I escaped from Abingdon as out of a prison, and rode to Clinch. I passed by Mr. Cummings's. He hath not labored for naught. Few men have a better house or plantation, but his plea is, he put his life in his hand, and so have I, every time I have crossed the wilderness and mountains. I expect a crown for my services. Were I to charge the people on the western waters for my services, I should take their roads, rocks, and mountains into the account, and rate my labors at a very high price. We crossed North Holstein and came to Dees, 16 miles, where we had a congregation of about 200 people. Sunday, 8. In the morning I awoke very unwell. I took a few drops of camphorated spirits, Bateman's drops, and paregoric, and found some ease, although my headache and fever still continued. I made out to preach to about 200 people. Monday, 9. I hobbled over the ridge, through the capital part of Russell County, 16 miles to Bees. These people have lived in peace ever since the death of Ben, the half-blooded Indian warrior, who was shot through the head while carrying off 2 women. He was a dreadful, wicked wretch, who, by report, may have been the agent of death to nearly 100 people in the wilderness, and on Russell. Here I preached to a few insensible people, and had time to read, write, and sleep in quiet. Yesterday our prayers were requested on behalf of F.D. This day in the evening Brother K. was called upon to perform her funeral solemnities. Perhaps she has been as great a female sufferer as I have heard of. The following account, in substance, was taken from her own mouth some time ago by J. Kobler, who performed her funeral rites. Her maiden name was Dickinson. She was married to a Mr. Scott, and lived in Powell's Valley, at which time the Indians were very troublesome, often killing and plundering the inhabitants. On a certain evening, her husband and children being in bed, 8 or 9 Indians rushed into the house. Her husband being alarmed, started up, when all that had guns fired at him. Although he was badly wounded, he broke through them all, and got out of the house. Several of them closely pursued him, and put an end to his life. They then murdered and scalped all her children before her eyes, plundered her house, and took her prisoner. The remainder of the night they spent around a fire in the woods, drinking, shouting, and dancing. The next day they divided the plunder, with great equality. Amongst the rest of the goods was one of Mr. Wesley's hymn books. She asked them for it, and they gave it to her. But when they saw her often reading therein, they were displeased, called her a conjurer, and took it from her. After this they traveled several days' journey towards the Indian towns. But, said she, my grief was so great, I could hardly believe my situation was a reality, but thought I dreamed. To aggravate my grief, one of the Indians hung my husband's and my children's scalps to his back, and would walk the next before me. In walking up and down the hills and mountains, I was worn out with fatigue and sorrow. They would often laugh when they saw me almost spent, and mimic my panting for breath. There was one Indian who was more humane than the rest. He would get me water, and make the others stop when I wanted to rest. Thus they carried me on 11 days' journey, until they were all greatly distressed with hunger. They then committed me to the care of an old Indian at the camp, while they went off a-hunting. Whilst the old man was busily employed in dressing a deerskin, I walked backward and forward through the woods, until I observed he took no notice of me. I then slipped off, and ran a considerable distance and came to a canebrake, where I hid myself very securely. Through most of the night I heard the Indians searching for me, and answering each other with a voice like that of an owl. Thus was I left alone in the savage wilderness, far from any inhabitants, without a morsel of food, or any friend to help, but the common Saviour and friend of all. To him I poured out my complaint in fervent prayer that he would not forsake me in this distressing circumstance. I then set out the course that I thought Kentucky lay, though with very little expectation of seeing a human face again, except that of the savages, whom I looked upon as so many fiends from the bottomless pit, and my greatest dread was that of meeting some of them whilst wandering in the wilderness. One day as I was traveling, I heard a loud human voice, and a prodigious noise, like horses running. I ran into a safe place and hid myself, and saw a company of Indians pass by, furiously driving a gang of horses which they had stolen from the white people. I had nothing to subsist upon but roots, young grapevines, and sweet cane, and such like produce of the woods. I accidentally came where a bear was eating a deer, and drew near in hopes of getting some, but he growled and looked angry, so I left him, and quickly passed on. At night when I lay down to rest, I never slept, but I dreamed of eating. In my lonesome travels, I came to a very large shelving rock, under which was a fine bed of leaves. I crept in among them, and determined there to end my days of sorrow. I lay there several hours, until my bones ached in so distressing a manner that I was obliged to stir out again. I then thought of and wished for home, and traveled on several days, till I came where Cumberland River breaks through the mountain. I went down the cliffs a considerable distance, until I was affrighted, and made an attempt to go back, but found the place, down which I had gone, was so steep that I could not return. I then saw but one way that I could go, which was a considerable perpendicular distance down to the bank of the river. I took hold of the top of a little bush, and for half an hour prayed fervently to God for assistance. I then let myself down by the little bush until it broke, and I went with great violence down to the bottom. This was early in the morning, and I lay there a considerable time, with a determination to go no farther. About 10 o'clock I grew so thirsty that I concluded to crawl to the water and drink, after which I found I could walk. The place I came through, as I have been since informed, is only 2 miles, and I was 4 days in getting through it. I traveled on until I came to a little path, one end of which led to the inhabitants, and the other to the wilderness. I knew not which end of the path to take. After standing and praying to the Lord for direction, I turned to take the end that led to the wilderness. Immediately there came a little bird of a dove color near to my feet, and fluttered along the path that led to the inhabitants. I did not observe this much at first, until it did it a second or third time. I then understood this as a direction of Providence, and took the path which led me to the inhabitants. Immediately after her safe arrival, she embraced religion, and lived and died a humble follower of Christ. Tennessee, Saturday, 14. We passed Russell Courthouse, and intended to go to B's, but were met by a most violent storm of rain, thunder, and lightning. We had a most dreadful crack. The fire and scent were like the discharge of a great gun. I was much alarmed for nearly a mile with expectation or fear of what would overtake us. We found shelter from part of the storm in a poor cabin, where some people had stopped on their way to Cumberland. Cold, labor, and being in the rain caused me to feel very unwell. Sunday, 15. How gladly would I have attended my bed rather than my meeting! But it was fixed otherwise, and I had to stand in the door, pressed with people, and preach to about 300 hearers. There was some stir among them. I felt better in soul and body after meeting than I did before. We passed through White County and rode 70 miles in 2 days. Thursday, 19. I was crowded with stupid sinners of various descriptions, to whom I preached on Joshua 24:19, "Ye cannot serve God," etc. It was a matter of surprise that I not only refused to stay a night, but that I did not eat bread nor drink water in that place. Friday 20. We rode 40 miles to Indian Creek, about 15 miles above the mouth. We had no place to dine until we arrived at Father C's about 6 o'clock. If I could have regular food and sleep, I could stand the fatigue I have to go through much better, but this is impossible under some circumstances. To sleep 4 hours and ride 40 miles without food or fire is hard, but we had water enough in the rivers and creeks. I shall have ridden nearly 1,000 miles on the western waters before I leave them. I have been on the waters of Nolichucky to the mouth of Clinch, on the north, middle, and south branches of Holstein, on New River, Greenbrier, and by the head springs of Monongalia. If I were able, I should go from Charleston, South Carolina, a direct course, 500 miles, to Nolichucky, thence 250 miles to Cumberland, thence 100 to Kentucky, thence 100 miles through that state and 200 to Salzburg, thence 200 to Greenbrier, thence 200 to Redstone, and 300 to Baltimore. Ah, if I were young again! I was happy to have a comfortable night's sleep, after a hard day's ride, and but little rest the night before. I have now a little time to refit, recollect, and write. Here forts and savages once had a being, but now peace and improvement. End of section 30. Recording by Brian Keenan.